Hey, are you interested in learning how to awaken your psychic powers? Well, if you are, stay tuned to this video because by the end of it, you're going to know what psychic sense you have and how to know that you're having it. I have my friend and expert here, Christina Courtney, who's a certified psychic, amazing person, and she is going to go through it with us and teach us all about our psychic senses, the clairs. All right. Hi, everybody. Okay, so I'm bringing Christina on, Christina Courtney, my friend's here to talk about the clairs. And so learning what your psychic powers are, like what your psychic senses are, how to learn them. And me and Christina did a great interview last week on how to become a psychic, and she shared her story of how she became a psychic. So if you haven't watched that video, you might want to watch that after you watch this video and get a little background, or watch it before or whenever. I'll link it. I'll put a card here for you. And I just want to introduce Christina. I'm so excited. So she's an alignment coach, a psychic, intuitive artist, and speaker who helps people who are ready for transformation. Who are ready for transformation, evolve past their own limiting beliefs, and align with their authentic selves so that they can live the blissful life that they were meant to live. Christina has a very broad spiritual background, including but not limited to being trained in nearly a dozen forms of energy healing, including working and traveling for the Reconnections, a Karuna Reiki master. She's a certified psychic, a healer, medium, and uses EFT regularly with her clients. And she offers workshops, retreats, and one-on-one sessions locally as well as internationally. And she's based in California. And for more information, you can visit her website, ChristinaBCourtney.com, and I will link this information below. So Christina, I'm so excited to have you here again. So let's get right into it. So people want to learn the clairs. So first, can you explain, if people don't really know what the clairs are, what are they?
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. The clairs are basically how we communicate with spirit and how we receive psychic messages, intuitive messages, gut feelings, whatever you want to call it. It's basically how we communicate with source, with spirit, and how we receive those messages. So there's primarily 4 clairs that most people are familiar with. There's some other clairs as well that we can touch on. Mm-hmm. But how should we just go through the different clairs?
So okay, there are 4 main ones, and so you may be familiar, you may not, with the clairs, but I just want to go from if people are just kind of exploring this, so what are the main ones? Just give maybe a brief explanation if someone's watching of what the 4 clairs are.
Sure, yeah. Some of my primary clair, and I think a lot of people's primary clair, is claircognizance, which is clear knowing. So it's like you just know something, you don't know how you know it, but you just know it.
Yeah.
And I often refer to that as I have this gut instinct, or, so those are, what is it, mother's intuition, right?
Yeah, and you're like, I know this is going to happen, and they're like, you're crazy, you're out of your mind, you're just being irrational or emotional. Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. But the sense of knowing, which actually is it's that intuitive sense, intuition as its core. The definition of intuition is you just know, yep. You don't have any way of knowing, but you just know. It's a feeling. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a really popular one, and there's no right or wrong. So if you don't have this one, that doesn't make it better or worse. All of them are equally beautiful. We're just inclined to be stronger in one area than the other in the beginning as we're opening up. So I find that a lot of people with claircognizance, there's also a lot of people who are really clairvoyant. So it's kind of like they'll see images. So clairvoyance is clear seeing. So when you're receiving intuitive messages, it's like you're seeing either a movie screen of something, or you're seeing, just as if you were to imagine seeing, if you were to imagine what you ate for breakfast, right? And you can, with your eyes open, you can see it. You can kind of see it in your mind's eye. Mm-hmm. You can visualize the smoothie or the eggs that you had or whatever you ate for breakfast.
Right. Yeah.
And so when you're getting those intuitive messages, you may see something in your mind's eye. And then another one is clairaudience. So that would be clear hearing. So when you're hearing messages, when it's almost like somebody's talking to you, just like you could imagine your best friend saying I love you, you know, you can imagine their voice right now. Oftentimes people think that it's something like outside of them and they're gonna hear people.
Yeah, that's what I thought with that too.
Yeah.
With clairaudience, like people get messages like spirits are talking to them, and I thought I thought I wasn't clairaudient because it didn't come through like that. And then I learned I actually am clairaudient too. I can hear like messages and things come through, or I'll hear music playing, or you know, like so it's kind of more like that when you remember like a song, or you remember you can like kind of remember somebody saying something to you. Sounds like it comes through that way.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that. I think that that's one of the biggest misconceptions in intuitive development. People be like, oh, I'm not intuitive, or I'm not psychic because I don't hear things outside of me, or I don't see things outside of me. I don't see auras, or blah, blah, blah. And it doesn't have to be so in your face as people think that it needs to be in order for it to be intuitive communication. It's actually often really subtle. And that's why a lot of people don't pay attention to it or suppress it, is because it can be really gentle. It can also be not so gentle. Some people do feel it outside of themselves, but I would say that's a much, much smaller percentage of the people that experience it that way.
Yeah. And I think that's the key too. So we're going to talk more about how you can hear them, but it comes through very subtly. And that's why even if you're psychic, very in tune with your abilities, like you and I are, like I know I still have to ask for clarification because it is like a very, very subtle sense. And like, I wish it was more in your face, but it's not. So that's why it takes development. So what is the last clair?
The last clair is clairsentience. So that's clear feeling. So when you either feel somebody's emotions, or you can even have physical sensations, say you're doing a mediumship session and you're, you know, asking how that person crossed over, you may feel like a tightness in your chest. That would be like clear feeling. You might get the feeling of, oh, it was a heart attack. So that's feeling sensations in your body, or also feeling emotions. And then there's a couple of little subcategories of that. They often put clairolfaction, which is clear smelling, and clairgustance sometimes underneath that category. Sometimes they're separated. And clairgustance is when you're tasting things. So sometimes that's a much less common one, but it does happen for some people where they'll taste something in their mouth, or where people will smell the smell of fresh baked cookies that their grandmother made, or something like that. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. And there's all different ones. And so the clairsentient one, is that like the same as an empath? Like people talk about like I'm an empath all the time, and that's like a very key buzzword, I feel like now.
Very similar. Yes. Yeah. Depending on who, because in this realm, in the spiritual development realm, because it's not something that's regulated, people have different definitions for different things. So if you went to one teacher, they may say that an empath is the same as somebody who's clairsentient. If you went to a different teacher, they may have different distinctions in it. So it can be confusing depending on who you're talking to. What's more important is kind of like understanding the experience underneath it and what's going on for you and how you navigate through that, as opposed to what we're labeling it or not, because some people will label it one thing and other people will label it differently. And I find that it can be a little bit confusing for some people.
Definitely. And it sounds like, so everybody's clairs sounds like they're individual. And, you know, that makes sense. What I found interesting, like learning about psychic development and the clairs, coming from like a background as a psychotherapist, was that it's kind of similar to learning styles. So if anybody's like familiar with like how you learn in school, like some people learn better you know, visually. So if they have a picture or PowerPoint, like they'll remember it. And some people remember better from hearing, like the auditory, you know, or actually experiencing things, which is the tactile learning, like very hands-on learning. And so it was so interesting to me when I started learning about the clairs that was so similar. So how you experience spirit and the messages coming through, it's really like similar to like a learning style, and it's just how you experience it. There is no like better like sense than another, but it's super important for you to know like how you experience spirit. So Christina, can you speak a little bit more on that of like, so we know what like the main four ones are, which are like, okay, you just said claircognizant, clairvoyant, clairaudient, and clairsentient. So with knowing that, like, how can people who are watching this like learn what their clairs are and like how to really use them?
Sure, yeah. So spirit is always trying to communicate with us. Spirit's always loving us, always supporting us, always guiding us. And so they always want the path of least resistance. They're going to use whatever way to communicate that's easiest for us. They're always, so loving and compassionate. They want to make it easy. So like you said, if somebody has a specific learning style, like say they're more a visual learner, it's often that spirit will start communicating with you through something that they're already good at. So if you're already feeling very comfortable as an artist, for example, or you're a real visual learner, your primary clair, oftentimes the primary clair is like the first one that you develop, or the one that you feel most comfortable in, or you experience the most, is often going to be in the similar learning style that you were talking about. So if you were to think about clairvoyance, for example, those would be the clear seeing. Those would often be the people who are creative, are artists, are visual learners. They're often going to see pictures or images in their mind's eye. Some of them will see colors or auras. I actually, because claircognizance was my primary and clairvoyance was my secondary, but the more I developed, the more clairvoyance grew. And it got to the point where I was doing readings and I would see these colors and images and I was like, I just want to paint them. And it
That's so cool.
story. But it actually evolved into a modality that I do now, which is intuitive art, or intuitive art for manifesting, where I'm using that intuitive gift of connecting to source, and then I'm painting it and telling them the story or giving them their reading while using a canvas and paint, because that's something that's so natural to me. And I'm able to communicate the message really well when I'm doing what's natural to me and I'm in my gifts, if you will. So yeah, that's how you would know if you were clairvoyant, is if you naturally are more artistically driven oftentimes, or visual learner. Clairsentience, if you're the type of person that is sensitive to energy, like if you can relate to someone who maybe you walk into a room of people and you can kind of feel the energy in the room and you're like, oh, I want to be here, I don't want to be here. Usually those are the people that are a little bit more introverted, because they feel things a little bit more. They oftentimes like to be by themselves a little bit because they are a little bit more sensitive. Yeah, so people are sensitive to their surroundings. Sometimes these people also will avoid watching like scary movies or like watching headlines in the news because they notice that they feel affected by it, which means that they're naturally driven to connect with those energies, those emotions. Yeah, and who feel emotions really strongly. So if you're the type of person that kind of resonates with being a really emotional person, or maybe like a sensitive person, your inclination is to feel. So if your inclination is to feel, that's probably how they're going to communicate with you at first. Which
I'm laughing because of like, that's so me. My emotions are all up and down, and I know as a very young child, like emotionally, I connected or felt things for people, and that was like, and that's probably my strongest sense, I guess, like growing up. And it's interesting too, like thinking about introvert, like because of being sensitive. So I have like an interesting experience of, I'm very extroverted. I love being around people and their energy, but I do have to have time where I pull back from people, or I have to make sure I'm in an environment that's very supportive, like where I feel connected to people. And so I was always like, am I introverted? Am I extroverted? But I do get super energized by being around people. And I also have to like, make sure I'm in a nurturing environment, because if I am around a lot of negativity or like, you know, kind of that bad feeling energy, like it wrecks like my mind. And I also notice like my emotions go up and down because I'm feeling what other people are feeling.
Yeah.
And as you develop, you learn how to like step back and just like let their feelings be theirs and your
Yes.
feelings be yours. So.
Yeah, that's a great point. I've noticed a lot of people as I'm working with them in the beginning, they may feel really introverted. They may isolate a lot because they don't know how to manage the feelings that they're getting.
Yeah.
And then later on, once they develop it and they understand it more and they learn how to turn it on and turn it off, they become more extroverted. So I don't know if you had that experience where you used to be introverted or more extroverted, or it's kind of like a balance and you wobble between them. But there's no fast right or wrong rule with this. Everybody's different, but I'm just curious to hear your experience.
My experience was kind of a back and forth experience. As a child, I was very extroverted. Like I just felt very connected to people and was very open and kind of naive, I think. And then I experienced like negativity in my relationships as I was going through school. I was bullied a lot. So I don't know, I don't know what happens, but I experienced a lot of negativity and that made me isolate. And then as I went through like my personal healing journey, you know, like I went through therapy and then I developed spiritually, you know, spiritual healing tools as well. And I found like as I was able to heal, I became more connected with people, and now I'm more outgoing, I'm more talkative. But it's funny because people who have known me from like when I was a teenager till now, they were like, you used to be like really super quiet and now like you can't, like I like you can't get me to stop talking, and I'm very outgoing. So if I'm in front, like I'll introduce myself to people, you know. So it was kind of like it's just an interesting like back and forth experience, and like everybody's experience I think is different.
Absolutely, yeah. But I think that's what you were explaining of the back and forth and how you are now is kind of like you navigating through that. You were working through it and now you're in this grounded place where you know who you are. You're able to use those gifts, but they don't distract you anymore and they're not overwhelming.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's so beautiful. I love that.
And that's something I learned in my training as a therapist. Like you learn how like, okay, their emotions, like this is their stuff, this is your stuff that's coming up, and how to do it. And a lot of spiritual tools do that. I also want to get back to clairaudience, because, you know, it's like, I think it's so interesting too. Once I learned really what it was, I think of like musicians, like, you know, so like a musician, for example, is like an example of clairaudience. Like they're getting this like auditory inspiration.
Yeah. So
Sound.
Yeah, so people who are musically inclined, whether you play instruments or you sing, or even people, I have a really good friend and he doesn't play any instruments or anything, but he can name off like every lyric from a song. Like it's crazy. And so he would definitely be somebody who is more inclined to be clairaudient because he remembers the words and what order the words go in. I also am working with somebody who has some hearing loss, and because of that he's actually stronger in that area. When he was developing intuitively, it was like that particular area, because the noise of the world was kind of dimmed down a little bit. It's almost like then spirit could raise up the volume if you will in his clairaudience. So yeah, there's no one right or wrong rule about this. Everybody's going to have their own unique experiences, and all of the clairs are also equal. You know, there's no one that's better or worse than the other. But yes, with clairaudience, those are often people too who have a lot of inner dialogue. Like if you're the type of person that's always running things through in your head.
That's me too. I'm like, that's me.
Like I'm all of them.
Well, I never realized how much I know I have a lot going on in my head, but then now I'm like, oh, okay, now it makes sense. Like why I'm
Yeah. So this is also like an auditory learner, somebody who loves like listening to audiobooks or plays music all the time. That could be an indicator that you're more clairaudient as well.
Yeah. So like, I guess overall, like before we end the interview is like, so overall, like how would somebody develop? Because I know for myself, like it's not necessarily important to, it's good to have an idea of what your clairs are, and you can have one or you can have many. It really depends on you. It's very personal. So what are ways, like some tools or practices or things that people can start using to help them connect with what their clairs are and overall like develop them?
Absolutely. Yeah, that's a great question. So I think we're going to talk about that in our next segment.
Yes.
To different practices that you can do, different tools that you can use to help develop these different clairs. So I think that we're going to give you tons of great information about that. But before we end this one, I wanted to talk about claircognizance. Is it okay?
Okay. Sorry. I'm so glad you're on track because obviously like I'm all over the place. So so share about claircognizance and
yeah, it's so much fun when we talk about this. It's like it all just flows and we're like excited.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, so claircognizance is where you're basically, it's like that clear knowing. This is often people who are kind of more like analytical or really like centered in themselves. Like when they have a clear sense of who they are, I find that people also have this experience. And again, this is like that just raw, like I just had that gut knowing, or that mother's intuition. It's just that pure intuitive just knowingness of something. And there's different ways that you can, going to your question about developing these different clairs, there's different ways that you can develop the clairs based on which clair you resonate with more. So say you just know, like, I am clairvoyant, that's how I get messages, that's what I want to develop, then there's certain things that you can do to particularly develop that clair. And then there's other things that you can do to develop different clairs. And again, no right or wrong in which one it is. It just depends on your own personal interests with them. But I think another thing that's important to mention with this is, as you're developing these clairs, it's almost like you're deciphering between different dialects in the language of spirit versus the language of your own experiences. So you're kind of separating what is Christina or what's Valentine versus what is spirit coming through you. So you're kind of going through this process of trial and error. So the way that you can develop it is really practicing it with it. That's the best way, is to practice and not to be afraid of getting it wrong, not to be afraid of the trial and error that goes with learning anything new. Like just as a child were to learn how to walk, they're going to fall a ton of times. And it's through the falling that they learn how to do it. So I think the best thing is to not put pressure on yourself, to be easy and relaxed with the process, and just to dabble and have fun and learn and practice and grow in that way.
Yeah, it is super fun. And you bring up such a good point too. Intuitive abilities and developing that way is so different from like the way we think about, like developing anything, right? You work hard, you got to work hard, you use stress, like very go. But intuitive ability, like intuition actually does come through when you're super relaxed and feeling good and in a great place. I mean, even if you're not feeling that way, that's the way it comes through. It's a very reassuring and loving voice. And so I do notice, like, the more relaxed I am, like that's when everything comes through. You kind of think of like before you fall asleep, like your head hits the pillow, all of a sudden you get all these ideas come through because you're super relaxed. And so it sounds like, basically like whatever clair you want to develop, let yourself be intuitively led to exploring that. Like what feels good, what feels like super fun now to explore. So we're going to end, because next video, we're going to go really more into, as Christina mentioned, how to practice these skills. But before we go, a couple things. I want you to comment on what clair do you think you have. So there was claircognizance, clairvoyance, clairsentience, and was it clairaudience? Did I like skip over? Yeah. So hopefully you were keeping track of the clairs. Which one do you think you are? Like, do you think there's one of them that's stronger, or do you think like you have a combination of them? Leave a comment below, let us know. And before we end, Christina, so if people want to connect with you and the work that you do, how would they do that?
Yeah. So I created a document that actually helps you decipher between those different voices, because spirit is always trying to talk to us. And like you said, they're going to get through in those times when we don't have a lot of other, where there's room for them to come in, right? When we're so busy, if the
Yeah.
voices can't get in, or the messages can't get in because our focus is elsewhere. So I often get a lot of my guidance, for example, like in the car when I'm driving and there's nothing else that I'm thinking about. And like
Yeah.
you said, where you go to bed. So when we have those experiences where we are letting in the information, it's important to know if it's the information from spirit or if it's our own internal thoughts and dialogue. And that was one of the biggest things that I had to learn, was sifting through that and noticing the difference. So I actually created this document that kind of helps you identify who's talking. Is it you? Is it God? Is it
Yeah.
source, spirit? So if you'd like, we'll leave a link down below where
Yes,
you.
I will put a link below. I've seen the guide. It's fantastic. And you need to connect with Christina because she is so amazing. She's shared, I've been in some workshops with her that she's run, and it's just fantastic. It's so loving and so accepting, I think, of where you are. So like, if you're, definitely connect with Christina and get on her email list. She's got some great stuff going on.
Thank you so much, Valentine.
All right, well, thank you for being here and sharing. And so next week, we're going to be talking about how to practice so that you can develop these clairs and your psychic development and intuitive abilities more.